Thank you for the invitation to tell my story. I am certainly not unique in finding ways around dyslexia and don't claim to be special. As I am sure you know, there are a vast number of highly successful people with dyslexia far more notable than me. For example, Richard Branson, Picasso, Tom Cruise, Anthony Hopkins, Steven Spielberg, etc., etc. There are many. I gather our University of Tasmania Vice-Chancellor Rufus Black is also dyslexic. This reinforces the notion that dyslexia is a hurdle, not a barrier. The two magic ingredients to success, I believe, are motivation and self-belief. Now for my personal story. I think there are some key serendipitous, beneficial life events which may have gotten me through, which I will mention as I get to them. The book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell illustrates some interesting examples of this and is a good read. The first couple of years of school for me were great. Then something happened and I fell off the pace. Maybe it was changing from phonetics to word recognition, I don't know. Serendipitous life event number 1. My parents valued education highly, and I accepted the unwritten expectation that that also applied to me. They were very supportive but frustrated. We all basically put my poor performance down to being lazy. I guess as a kid, when something is difficult, you lose interest. I could not stay focused. And once I wandered off, the thread was lost and I got further behind. I wonder how many ADHD children are dyslexic. I still find it hard to shake the belief that I am lazy. I gather this is not uncommon in dyslexics. I think the brain wants the information faster than your reading can deliver it. You get tired and lose interest. I still have this problem. Life event number 2. Because of the generally accepted expectation that I would get well educated and get a good job, despite being at the bottom of the class, I always chose the difficult, more advanced subjects for the next year. And the school let me. I doubt that would happen today. Then I would just come bottom again. At one point, I chose French over woodwork and metalwork. At the time, it was considered the more educationally progressive pathway. I also thought that having failed English because I was lazy, this was a chance to start afresh. Mistake. 6% for my last exam. The comment on my report card was "little hope here." My parents showed me this some years later. In retrospect, the trade subject would have provided me with valuable skills I've used throughout my life, particularly now as a sculptor, and probably given me achievement, self-esteem, which I was pretty low on. My father met with the headmaster. He told Dad I was the worst speller in the school, excluding kindergarten. They arranged for me to see some people who did what I presume was an IQ test. They told me I could do anything I wanted and gave me a spelling book to learn. I thought that was great news until I told my best friend from another school. He just laughed and said a dumb kid at his school was told the same thing. I certainly did not enjoy school. It was somewhat of a nightmare. I would keep my head down so as not to be picked to read aloud. I often misbehaved. I knew the cane well. I felt embarrassment, frustration, shame, anxiety, and lack of confidence. I gather that it is not uncommon for dyslexics to fudge things to get by. One day our English teacher told us that the next day we were to present a review of a book we had read recently. Well, I had never read a book, so I made one up. When I did eventually pull my finger out, even then I just read the summaries at the back of the history books and the literature reviews, etc. I just listened to the comments others made about the books we were supposed to be reading and regurgitated it in the exam. Event 3. At about the age of 12 or 13, I saw a brand new E-type Jag on the Gold Coast. I had found a motivation. Event 4, as I mentioned previously, my father, who was an engineer, had a strong work ethic. He believed in getting a good job to provide self-worth, contribute to the community, etc. He did not aspire to have luxury material things or strive for wealth for its own sake. Not really my thing as a kid. He was right, of course. I've heard it said that by the time you realise your father was right, you have a son that thinks you are wrong. My mother, on the other hand, understood my desire for something like an E-type Jag and pointed out the reality that without passing my exams, this was not going to happen. Reinforced motivation. Event 5. In our school's board year, as it was then probably year 10, our English teacher informed a group of us that we were to do English 1, I guess English for dummies, to prepare us for everyday life. I actually enjoyed it and achieved a credit in the end of year external exam. This provided me with some positive reinforcement at last. A good example of how we are all capable of performing far better is that our geography teacher in that same year failed nearly all of us in the mid-year exam. At the final exam, which was external, my class topped the state and I got another credit. My mother's words that if I failed my school's board, I would be lucky to get a job digging holes in the road, along with my materialistic desires and a wish to please my father, put the fear of God in me regarding these external exams outside the sheltered environment of my school. I ended up doing quite well. My schoolmate and I, who weren't doing too well at school, bought a syllabus booklet from the local bookshop, looked up what we were meant to have been doing throughout the year and took 2 weeks off and did it. I managed my first year matriculation, or year 11, in much the same way. I was becoming more confident and, with the support of my English teacher, chose to do English literature in year 12. I did not read the books but winged it with the summaries and just listening once again. I did not really know what I wanted to do as a job. I was interested in how the body worked and what surgeons did, but could not contemplate six more years of study. I enrolled in science at university with the idea of becoming a geologist, which was in vogue at the time. Problem was, I hated geology excursions. I could not handle the concepts of pure maths either. I did not do well. I mostly achieved what they called terminating passes. I envied my friends who were doing medicine and decided to enrol the next year. Event number 6. There was not a quota for entry into first year medicine that year, and I was permitted to enrol. It was entry into second year that was limited. I had learnt from my first year failings how to study at university, and with the fear of the quota, I ended up overshooting and came second in the year. More positive reinforcement and confidence. My reading was still very slow, but medical science is largely concepts, particularly anatomy. Our anatomy tutor at one point told our group that only one of us, and that was certainly not me, would pass unless we lifted our game. We did. I ended up with a high distinction and topped the year. More confidence. We are all capable of more, both intellectually and physically, when pushed, either by extrinsic or intrinsic motivators. A dyslexic colleague of mine, who ultimately became a professor, used to tell students he had a Holden brain but drove it like a Porsche. It eventually became a Porsche. My brother is 8 years younger than me. I remember thinking at some stage that although I was lazy, I must have had more practice reading than him, and yet he was a far better reader and speller. Was there actually something wrong with me? While in my third year of medicine, I ran into my school English teacher in town one day, and he asked me if now that I was doing medicine, had I worked out what was wrong with me. I put it down to an underdeveloped association centre in the brain, which is probably not far off the mark. We were doing neurophysiology at the time. We were given a project in 5th year to write a lifestyle study. I chose ship's captains, probably because my father knew some. It was, in fact, very interesting talking to him. Another story. The report was handwritten, as most things were then. At the time, our medicine professor had a learning disability friend visiting from Sydney. She took one look at my handwriting and said, "Do you realise you have a dyslexic student in your course?" When I was informed, they reassured me that it did not imply intellectual impairment and that typically dyslexics find alternative ways to get things done. As Richard Branson apparently said, while you will have this for the rest of your life, you can dart between the raindrops and get to where you want to go, and it will not hold you back. Fortunately, my bad spelling and grammar has not met with any barriers from conservative elements within my profession or society in general. It has provided plenty of amusement, though. I'm still afraid of being asked to read anything aloud that I have not had the opportunity to practice. I still believe I have a lazy streak. I suffer a bit from the imposter syndrome that one day I will be found out. I gather this is not uncommon with successful dyslexics, years of fudging things, I guess. I struggle with subtitled movies. Is now getting to be a dilemma between my slow reading and my poor hearing. I have to force myself to read things like instructions and headlines carefully, as there is a tendency when I skim to jump to the wrong conclusions from just a couple of letters. I often don't get written dyslexic jokes. Spell check on computers is very helpful. There is more red than black sometimes. Sometimes it can't even help. I will now often first type a letter I intend to hand write on the computer so that I get the spelling right. Is it better to know you are dyslexic early? I'm sure it is now better to be diagnosed early, as there are strategies to help. When I was young, I naively believed that you could be the world champion at anything if you practiced enough. Thus, once I had the motivation, I managed to push through. I worry that an early diagnosis in my case, without the current supports, could have resulted in me just giving up. I was reading about a prominent American plastic surgeon and artist who is also dyslexic. He was asked in an interview, what would people be surprised to learn about you? His reply, my teachers would likely be surprised I am a doctor. Most folks didn't know much about learning disabilities when I was at school. Sounds familiar? I also read an interesting article some time back in the Weekend Australian magazine about artist Vincent Van Tuzo, another dyslexic. How many gifted and creative dyslexics have been blocked from fulfilling their potential? I believe the ingredients needed to succeed are to be encouraged by loving parents, to establish a belief in the value of education and the choices in life that it provides. Try to find a motivator or motivators. Try to instill self-belief by providing some enjoyable and in particular achievable pursuits that can give positive reinforcement. Relate success stories, individuals likely to be admired, for example Stephen McQueen, who I gather was also dyslexic. I did not ever buy an E-type Jaguar, but I did get a chance to borrow one for a few days. My new passion is electric mountain bike riding. It makes me feel about 35 again. It enables me to ride with my son and also my old mates. I hope you enjoy the conference and gain a little more knowledge to optimise our generations and next generation's potential. Thank you.